everyone. I'm Hei Wai Tang, the director of the Asia Global Institute, another full house event. Although the room is not that big, we should make it bigger. If we have money to renovate the room to get more and more people to come to our regular events. And today I'm very honored to have a good friend of mine, Rachel Jia, who flew all the way from California last month, and she has been at Hong Kong U visiting the business school in the last few weeks to talk about her new book with Professor Hongbin Li, and the title is The Highest Exam. Rachel is a star economist in the US, teaching at UC California, University of California, San Diego, in the School of Global Policy and Strategy. She's a political economist interested in studying the interactions between politics, political economy, history, and obviously development. And she has been publishing a lot of great papers in leading journals. I was just talking to her about why all of a sudden she decided to write a book, because economists don't need to write books. They only need to write papers in order to become chair professor. And then she said she has done so much work with Hongbin and learned so much about the education system in China. So at some point she thought, well, they have something to share with the rest of the world. Today she's going to talk about the book, and my understanding is the book will teach us a lot about Gaokao, the higher education system, examination system in China, which has created quite a lot of stress and maybe some mental problems among young people in China. But the system somehow has worked so well in creating meritocracy in China. And obviously, China is one of the leading technological powers in the world. So something worked, but maybe there's some downside about this system. But she's going to share with us the background, the history, but also the implications for China and also the US as well as the rest of the world. Following Professor Jia's book talk is going to be a discussion given by our new faculty at Hong Kong U School of Governance and Policy. In fact, he's the new director.
What is the top conversation topics in China and the US? This is what he said. Children's education for China, whereas in the US it's often jobs and sports. So the professional education is not only about talking, it's also about money and the resources and the time and the energy. So if you do household survey comparison, Chinese households also spend a lot in children's education. One number would be like 8% of our household spending. It's relatively high, even higher than South Korea, which is also known to be obsessed with education, partly because it was influenced by China in history. And obviously, this obsession with the Gaokao having mentioned in the beginning. This book is not about Gaokao only, it's more about Chinese education as an exam system. And Gaokao is the peak, right, of this exam system, so that's why we pick it as the title. And this exam system has a long history, as you all know. It's arguably it could be dated back at least to the imperial exam from the Sui dynasty. If you count from the Sui dynasty, that's already more than 1,400 years. And today's Gaokao was created in 1952. It was stopped during the Cultural Revolution and reinstated in 1977. And we show in the book these two systems have a lot of parallel and similarity. I'll talk a little bit about this later. Today, many people complained about the quota system, how unfair it is. But this system started in the Ming Dynasty. That's 500 years ago, right? And this was, as I'll tell you, it was not initiated for fairness or for equality. It's for political logic. Today you talk about the first tier cutoff, the second tier cutoff. This is very analogous to the Ming Dynasty. Jin Shi would have different cutoff to rank these students. These are just some examples. So what motivates us to think about, to study Chinese education is this set of questions. Education is important in every society, right? It's important, Then what makes China's education system distinctive? Yes, we all see Chinese obsessed with the exam, but why? And how unequal or equal the Chinese education system is, and why this system has survived for so long, for more than 1,000 years, and how is this education system related to Chinese society broadly. And then, at the national level, we are also interested as economists, how does education help with China's global power and economic development, especially in this age of US-China competition. And what would happen globally, or is already happened when this exam system go abroad, right, with many Chinese immigrants in different countries, especially in the US, or students study abroad, when this meet other systems, what would happen? And finally, some reflection to ourselves. How should we teach our children and our students like you, some of you? So this is, in some sense, a special book. It's not a very standard book because we kind of combine both our personal experiences, observations, and the research. So I have studied the exam system, both historical version and the today's Gaokao for 15 years, and Hongbin is 12 years older than me. So his experience is even longer. And we were educated, we both grew up in China, we were educated in the US and Sweden in my case, and we taught in different systems. So we have some observations. But the main thing is based on peer-reviewed social science research. Some of the research is done by ourselves and our collaborators, but a lot also done by others. I'll share some idea with you. And the hope is to provide a framework accessible to general readers. So today I'll show you some figures and some even tables. This is the build on research we have been doing. But in the book, there's no table, no figure. It's a very simple English. And thanks to the help of our third author, Claire, which has become, I think if you take a flight from Hong Kong to Beijing, you can read the book twice. I will also, include intentionally certain chapters, focus on dedicated chapters, understand what this means for China's global power and development, and finally how this affects U.S. Education. The debate now, there's also very heated debate about what education should be in the U.S. And this is the contents, as you see, it's a bit broad, from family, state, and society. But the best part of the paper is, the book is relatively short, about 200 pages, as I said. So it will be a quick read, but hopefully you'll find it's also a substantive read. So in today's talk, I will share 4 ideas in this selected from the book. One is this framework. We describe Chinese education as a centralized hierarchical tournament. And I'll explain what this means and why it matters for families, society, and state. Then I'll talk a little bit about the implication for China's development. And I will mention a little bit about how we think about this question. A lot of you have been asking or yourself or have heard about it. Does China's education stand for creativity? And finally, I talk a little bit about Chinese education in America. Okay. So now I'll come to this framework, which we call centralized hierarchical tournament. So let me explain these 3 words, each one by one. But let me start it with hierarchy. Growing up in China or East Asia, we are very familiar with this is a very hierarchical society, including Hong Kong, I have to say. Historically, it's relatively simple, right? There's these 4 classes: the gentry, the farmers, the craftsmen, the merchants. If you pass the imperial exam, you belong to the gentry class. That's the high end of the hierarchy. Today's hierarchy is multiple dimensional, right? It could be, I'm from Beijing, you are from Henan. Sorry, I don't know who is from Henan. I'm a professor, you are a migrant worker. I earned this much, or even education background, right? I graduated from Tsinghua or Beida, and you don't. So it's true, there's more dimension, but what's striking, as you all know, maybe is that state jobs are still at the top of this hierarchy. And this is, some data comes from a few years large-scale survey when this is Hongbin did with his team when he was at Tsinghua. It just strikingly, in those 6 years, over 60% of graduates still prefer to working for the state sector if they could. Not everyone could, but that's their top preference. And if you ask them today with economic slowing down, I imagine this would be even higher, right? So something in China, on the one hand, so many things have changed so much in China. On the other hand, something is very persistent. So how about tournament?
So test is a tournament system, right? There's two key characteristics. First is in this tournament, the rules are very simple, clear, and transparent. The second is the criteria is objective. That is the test score. I think this is the first lesson of tournament for most Chinese because usually we don't take sports first. We take an exam first. And I want to see what's the key feature of this is that this is the first fundamentally is a selection system. The selection function is more important than education function. So we'll talk about this again and again because Chinese exam system is not an education system. It's fundamentally a selection system. Yes, you will be educated, but that's second order. So this itself has many implications, and I will talk more about this later. But it certainly has also problems or shortcomings. So one problem I want to highlight is this selection happened too early. Using the college entrance exam as example, you took it at age 18 and 19, and it's so crucial, and it determined the first degree you had, your major. Some of us could change, but it's very difficult, right? Hongbi and I were lucky. We chose economics without knowing what economics is, but we like it. But many of you, or many of young people, right, they chose something, but stick with them. And maybe some of you still doing PhD in economics, even though you don't like it, unfortunately. But that's the one problem. It happened too early. Okay. The third, and also very, very important, is the centralized system, right? Because this exam system, initiated as a governance system by the central government, you can imagine with thousands of years of development, it's become very sophisticated and in some sense very carefully designed system. And obviously the Gaokao, this happened in every June 20 years ago. When I took it, it's more in July, in these 2 or 3 days. It's certainly it's large-scale national tournament everyone pays attention to. And also the college, the testing subjects were centralized and very carefully designed. And college admission was governed by a quota system, again, centralized and allocated following a certain political logic, and the admission is centralized. So it's not only about the college admission itself, the whole system, right? The education system is centralized, the administration is centralized. As you know, school officials would have bureaucratic ranks, right? If you are the head of Beijing University, you are vice minister rank. So it's certainly, obviously the curricula also are centralized. And this means this system has its own strengths and benefits, and weaknesses I will share with you soon. So, but once you have this framework, I'll explain a little bit how to understand the behaviors of families, rulers, or state and society in this framework. Why everyone is obsessed with this system. First, I want to say that, to share with you that for families, obsession with the test or investment in test is rational. It's not that people are crazy. The typical conjecture, even the evidence is not a lot, is that, oh, maybe 1 point matters, right? That's why families always want their children to study harder, to get 1 point more, maybe your life would be different. Is there any evidence? So in some of our research, we just compare students with 1 point above or 1 point below the first tier cutoff. And this is an economist magazine summarized our paper. It's true, it's actually around the cutoff, it certainly matters. You are more likely to go to the top 100 colleges. That's 211, as all the Chinese would all know, the top 100 university in China. And after graduation, you also get a better, higher wage. If you use these statistics, it would back up that attending the top 100 college or the elite college in China would be associated with about 40% higher in terms of your first job income. And as we all know, that income is only one of many things of the whole package of what education would bring. Right? It also affects your hukou. It also has hidden benefits and affects your identity and status of the society. So in that sense, it's not surprising. It's not necessary every point matter in all the distribution, but at critical cutoff, this matters a lot. And that's incentivize people to invest a lot in the system. And for rulers, for over 1,000 years, this has been proven to be effective for governance. As I said, it's very carefully designed and developed over such a long time horizon, right? It provides us kind of hope for everyone, even though the chance of success is very small. The probability of become 进士 historically, or today the probability go to the top 100 colleges is very small. But ex ante, everyone feels they have hope. Historically, only men, but today both women and men feel we have hope, right? And in such a system, if you fail, you don't blame the system. You would blame yourself. Why don't I work so hard, as hard as others do? And you also, obviously, historically, it's very explicit. You own your power. Your power comes from the ruler and the system, right? Rather than your family or the aristocrat class historically. Today is implicit. It's less explicit, but the logic is the same. And for the country, this exam does select talent, right? It selects for diligence and intelligence. And these people would work for the country or for the government. And the quota system ensures a balance of power. So as I said, it's never intended for fairness, right? If you think you are a ruler, where would you assign high quota? You probably would assign it to where, the regions were politically more important. And that's exactly what's going on in today's China, right? It's Beijing, Shanghai, and those regions like Tibet, Xinjiang have more higher quotas per capita. And the middle provinces like Shandong, Henan, Guangdong, these populous provinces was the group that lost out from this distribution. And also, obviously, with the test system, as a government, you can also monopolize the contents and the ideology. So it's a very effective system. And we also know that what would happen if the system be abolished. And this happened once, at least, historically in 1905. And my co-author, Bai Ying from Chinese University in Hong Kong, and I did some study we started this in 2010, so it's become a long time ago. We find that after the abolition of the exam system, the regions that used to have more higher quota, basically more hope for people, there would be more revolutionary participants from those regions. So when this paper was published, it was discussed by foreign policy here. It's not about historical China. It's used this to talk about America's problem. I just want to say, in general, for every society, to give young people hope is very, very important for stability. And the exam system, in some sense, is it's a mechanism to provide hope. And for society, I want to emphasize that on the one hand, education affects society. It influences how the people's value, etc. But it also reflects the society. So I want to emphasize the reflects part first, because this tournament, as I said, has two features. Has a clear hierarchy and has a objective measure. It's widely used in China, right? It's used in political tournament, in political promotion. It could be GDP growth. It could be COVID control. It could be one-child policy. But there's some criteria to compete for. And it's also used so much in academia for the faculty here. We all know, right? We rank our journals into tier A, B, C. And in the evaluation of tenure, you have to publish, I don't want to be too personal, but whereas in the U.S. it's always try to be weak, right? You will be, we are asked to become a leader in a field or a subfield. So, and of course in business it's also used a lot. And there is also again a logic, right? In this society, because power and connections can easily influence outcomes. So you want to keep such an institution to mitigate the influence of power, right? But this system also affects the society and social values, right? In such a system, there's a lot of social respect for winners and very limited sympathy for losers, right? Because if you don't make it, either you are lazy or you are not smart enough. And such a view, make people very skeptical of the welfare state, right? You are less willing to help those people who are not so successful. And this matters a lot to think about institutional design for China as the society has been becoming more and more unequal. what would be the solution. And obviously, with the general pie or the economic slowdown, this naturally would lead to super competitive environment, and that's the 内卷, right? That's the logic of such a system. I also want to emphasize, even though I said this is a clever system in the sense it provides hope for all, but it doesn't mean that everyone has equal chance in this system. It's certainly a very unequal or unequal system. So in the book, we talk about 3 dimensions. I already hinted at the regional quota is very unequal. And then urban-rural gap is a big phenomenon, a big dimension in Chinese economic conditions. So in fact, Hongbin and I, our own experience we read in the book, basically highlight this gap. So Hongbin, born in 1972, he grew up in the city. He grew up in a state-owned factory. I born in 1984. Immediately I was adopted in a rural village in Shandong. And we wrote about, besides preparing for the exam and study at school, we all like to play games. And Hongbin played chess. This is the real Chinese chess. I don't know whether you can see it. So that's his chess. Whereas in our village, no one was willing to spend any money on the chess. So we made the chess ourselves from stones and branches. So if you generalize this gap, this would say my village would be at least 12 years behind Hongbin city, right? Because I grew up in a more developed China, yet I couldn't afford a pair of chess. That said, Hongbin's hometown is not the richest in China, right? Home is not far from the richest city, and my village is far from the poorest village, right? If you generalize this, basically the rural-urban gap is so huge, right? It's more than 12 years, maybe 20 years of development. And another dimension is family income. So we did some calculation with data, just curious how unequal China's education is. So one way is you can divide families into 5 groups. The bottom is the bottom 20 percentile, and this is the rich 20 percentile. First is everyone's chance of go to the top 100 college is not very high. It's all below 5%. And this is about the cohort that was born around the 1990s to 1995. But nevertheless, if you are from a richer family, you are much more likely to go to an elite college. That's about 2 to 3 times. Let's say 3 times higher. So how about the US? If you compare do the same calculation, in the US, arguably, there's also a parallel top 100 colleges. And that magnitude difference would be 11-fold. So Chinese system being unequal, still actually more accessible than the US system. So this is just more about policy, right? So if you want to think about mitigate the inequality, perhaps the answer doesn't lie in the exam per se. It's more like more equal distribution of education resources is the key. I'll be happy to talk together about this potential solutions for the policymakers. So just a short summary that if you ask me to use one line to summarize Chinese education system, I would say it is a centralized hierarchical tournament implemented while many exams. And this exam system is arguably one of the most long-standing institutions and the most important one, even that matters in today's China. But as fundamentally, it's a governance mechanism than an education mechanism. And everyone has a hope, but not everyone has equal chance in such a system. And how such a system affects China's development, and what's the implications for US-China tensions? So I just briefly talk a little bit about education and global power. As we all know, especially for economics, we are familiar with the positive relationship. Generally, richer countries would have a higher level of education. So if you do the very simple accounting exercise, if you just assume everything else is equal, just use education to explain GDP per capita across country, that would explain about 1/3. So education for every country is important. And China's system, in some sense, has strength and problem. Because it's a centralized system, so in such a system, if you make a mistake, it's costly, right? It concerns so many families. It's also difficult for the government to predict the market changes, especially in this age of new technology, AI, and automation. That said, this system has its clear strengths. It can easily expand the quantity. It can also affect the types of human capital the state wants to achieve economic development. And that's become essential in today's high-tech computation. So just give you some numbers of the scale and the type of Chinese human capital. So on the one hand, so in terms of quantity, China's college enrollment each year is already more than 4. It's about more than 4 times of the U.S. In terms of the scale. But because there are much more STEM students in China than the U.S., so if you account for both together, then the STEM students would be 10 times higher than the US counterpart. And another thing is, even within STEM, there's a difference. So for instance, one way is to look at the number of engineers, which is essential for the new development of high-tech and manufacturing, etc. So first is this quantitatively, China has about 10 times more engineers than the US. Another difference is that China's engineers, a lot of them are hardware engineers, whereas in the US case, many of them are software engineers. So this gives China some edge in this type of new manufacturing sector in the future. I can talk more in the discussion about other dimensions. Finally, the third one I want to talk a little bit, because this is often asked, is does China's education stifle creativity? You hear this again and again. I want to point out, I wouldn't give you an answer, is yes or no. I want to point out and think together, is this a right question to ask? Okay, you hear this kind of hypothesis a lot on the internet. Now it's AI would make China's educational advantage obsolete, right? Because China's education emphasizes existing knowledge, and AI is doing better than us, etc. China's education stifles imagination. You see this again and again. Based on all the, again, anecdotal evidence, right? If you look at all these creative entrepreneurs, they often come from pretty good universities. It's difficult to believe that that's necessarily true. That said, of course, even in AI, as you all know, right? Nowadays, Chinese AI talent account for about 40% or even 50% of global AI talent, right? So it seems difficult to think that AI, in this AI age, China would do badly because of its education system. That said, I also want to share with you some research we have done. Another dimension is about entrepreneurship. Is that like high score, you are less creative, less open, and you are less likely to create forms. So first, we access all the universal Chinese forms and their founders. And we match this with some years of administrative records. So for everyone, we know their college entrance exam score, which college they end up with, etc., etc. So first fact is that among the average number of entrepreneurship is pretty high in China. So every 100 Chinese graduates, so these are people at my age. I already told you I was born in 1984. So these are people in their 30s and 40s, 35 and 40s. Among them, among every 100 of them, there are 7 firm owners. So 7 of them have founded some firms, which is pretty entrepreneurial. But that said, it's true. If you look at the relationship between score, their college Gaokao score, and the probability of create firms, that high score students are less likely to create firms. However, when you do it and go deeper to understand why, it's not because these people have lower ability. If anything, firms created by these high score students appear to be more successful. They are larger, more likely to expand, etc. The reason they are less likely to create firms is mainly because they have better outside option. When they graduated, they already get jobs in the government sector or in the large foreign firms. Why do they bother to create firms themselves? So we don't find evidence that this is high score, low ability. We don't find any evidence supporting this hypothesis. That said, I want to emphasize that it's not that we see Chinese education is perfect, it doesn't stifle anything. What I want to say is it's more useful to be more concrete about what type of skills being stifled by the Chinese education system. We see at least two sets. One is the social skill, right? Social skills have been always important in the labor market, right? And we, at least in my case, right, I didn't get much social skill investment when I was in schools. And these skills may be even more valuable in this age of AI and automation, right? So that is lacked or suppressed by the Chinese system. Another important dimension is this courage to challenge authority. As I was saying, this is very important for innovation and leadership. And the test system indeed, maybe actively suppressed, your incentive to challenge authority and question the teachers. But I want to emphasize again, this is not a problem of education system itself, right? As education reflects the society, right? It's in the whole society, we are not encouraged to challenge authority. So you can't change the education alone if you want to change this. Again, as I want to see that this education system selected smart and hardworking people, at least try to select such people, whether these people spend their effort on innovation or spend their effort to developing some relationship with their deans, like for instance, it's an incentive question. It's whether this incentive, if the whole society doesn't encourage people to challenge authority, to make innovation, want people to follow the order, then you cannot just reform the education system to change this. And this, I think, is essential if China wants to become a leader of the world. And finally, I just want to be very brief about the exam empire expands, especially the Chinese in the US education. As you all know that now there's a heated debate in the US about these issues because Chinese, both Chinese college system and American college system are hierarchical, I would say, but their criteria of defining success are very different, right? In China, this tournament based on one test score is transparent, well-defined, etc. Whereas the US system uses multiple factors and it's also trying to emphasize values differences and variety among students. And with this system each other, there's a very natural conflict. And the Chinese parents are skeptical because it's very natural to be skeptical. If you grow up in China, if you think there'll be subjective measures, then you know that the power would influence the decision, right? So it's natural to be skeptical. And being an immigrant in the US, you don't have a lot of social capital. So that added to even more that you prefer this preference for some objective measure. And this consequence is at national level in this case against Harvard, right? After a long time of struggle, actually the Asians in some sense win, but this has a lot of policy implications and debate in the US society. This is not only about national level. If you're living in California, because we have a lot of Chinese immigrants, even at the local level, there's a lot of debate about how to educate the children and the students. And a group of economists find a phenomena of white flight in the sense in California, in some districts, when there are more Asian immigrants, then there'll be more white people live in that area to avoid the computation. And that certainly is not, for the Chinese Americans, the whole group is not a good phenomena, right? Think about your future of the society. Okay, so I try to shut up soon, but this is the book. We attempt to understand the Chinese education system. We try to provide a framework, but far from. Sorry, I will give you an exam after the talk. Framework, but it's far away from really the final answers. I think more research by young people like some of you and the debate needed if we want to change the system or improve the system. And here is the self-promotion. So you can buy the book at Amazon. What I learned is actually now you discount both electronic version and hard copy version. What I learned, this is the first book I only wrote. So what I learned is actually it's nice that your book is on discount, right? It's a very good news. I didn't know this before. Anyway, I'll shut up here. I'm looking forward to Ken's comments and your questions. Okay, thanks.
So there's a wonderful summary of your 200-page book, but I think the book should be 2,000 pages because you cover so many things. Well, there are more people at the back right now. And it's my bad that I didn't allow you to speak longer. I should give you an hour. But I bet there are a lot of questions from the audience. But before we turn to the audience who have many questions to ask, let me invite my colleague, Kenneth Wong, to talk about, any comments you have for the book and what you think about this system affecting the place that you have worked and lived for many years.
Thank you, Professor Tan. Wonderful book, Professor. So let me just say that when I first got the book, before I opened the book, I thought that I'm going to encounter a lot of equations and statistical modeling, because that's what most economists are doing and continue to do, and that's their contribution to social sciences. And to my pleasant surprise, I did not see any statistical equations or multinomial predictions and things like that, probability. But instead, I see some very deep, intimate, personal journey, narrative that weave with very sophisticated social science research. And I think this integration of personal journey, narrative on key policy document and development from both historical and analytical perspective, but most importantly, also synthesis of social science research conducted by the authors in the book. And so I really appreciate this integration of diverse sources of information and perspectives and make it into a very complete systemic understanding of what the highest examination is about, the Gaokao. And I think this book really addressed a very critical issue of global interest, and that is what made China today China is. What made China what China is today. And I think in going through the book, I developed a deep sense of understanding that, yes, Gaokao is really serving some very important social, economic, as well as governing functions for the society as a whole. And as a result of Gaokao, we see what China is today. And in fact, the implications is far-reaching because we've got immigrants from China to other countries. And in the US, as Professor Jia mentioned, we already see a lot of debate going on between different lands and different views of what education ought to be about and what kind of norms and values the different parents from different backgrounds have placed on their children and their children's children. So going forward, I think the ramifications is going to be huge. One very important contribution of the book that I find is that it really speaks to the relationship, the dynamics between education system and society. This is a very complex system. But if I simply put it, when society is in trouble, education comes to the rescue. Why is that? Because as Professor Jia mentioned, time and again in China's history, particularly since the Cultural Revolution, Gaokao has contributed to political stability to a great extent. It has restored the kind of public confidence and trust in public institutions that were dismantled during the Cultural Revolution. And because of prevailing corruption and abusive use of power here and there on different walks of life, I think Gaokao really gave people a faith and hope that the system could be transparent and measures of success and meritocracy could be grounded in objective undertakings and measures. And therefore, they have rediscovered and restored and continue to sustain their faith in the public governance system. So I think education system, particularly Gaokao, came to the rescue along the way. So I think that's a very important lesson from the book. At the same time, if you look across the Atlantic Ocean in the US, which my own research focuses on mostly, time and again, education system has been called to desegregate racial inequality since 1950s. And then it was called to deal with anti-poverty strategy because education is the best way for social mobility. So in that regard, the education system in both US and China share some commonalities. And that is, it allows this hope that there is this opportunity to move out of the particular situation. So I learned a lot, and I think there are some very broad lessons that we can draw and transferable. And here are just a couple of quick questions. Number one, it seems that Gaokao is one among several important key social structures that affect the way that we behave as a society in China. And the other major social structure that the book mentioned, of course, is hukou. So I keep wondering the dynamics and the interaction between hukou, which is household classification based on your birth and birthplace, and then the subsequent ordering of opportunities based on those classifications by residents, and Gaokao, which is buffering some of the constraints of hukou. This hukou is very rigid, but then Gaokao allows for social mobility and transparency, and everybody have an equal chance if you work hard and succeed. And then the consequences will be extremely rewarding. And so the public in general are willing to put a lot of faith into Gaokao, even though many of them might feel constrained by hukou. So I keep thinking that maybe one of the key research implications from this study is to really examine this very complex and dynamic interplay between Gaokao and hukou. For example, if we don't have hukou, what will happen to Gaokao? The system may not be as manageable as we used to, but then it could allow for tremendous amount of mobility of labor, people, and families, and resources. But on the other hand, if you don't have hukou, does Gaokao work as efficiently as it can be? Because this leads to my second set of observation, and that is that right now, even though the image as articulated in a framework is a centralized hierarchical tournament, and particularly underscoring and emphasizing centralized and hierarchical. And so the question is that this image could be relaxed a little bit, because in reality, the implementation of Gaokao is somewhat decentralized, because so the students who are taking examination in one province, their exam is somewhat different. The scores are not comparable because the items are different. And so they are competing only against their peers within the same jurisdiction. They are not competing against the national peers at the national level. So it's a complicated situation. To some extent, it is completed against the national because the university recruit nationwide. But then the ranking is tied to the individual provincial kind of design. And so although the central has set the standards and the cutoff and things like that, but then there are some implementation variability. There seems to be some room going on. And so I would be very interested to see this hybrid, this kind of a quasi-hybrid mixture, institutional mixture of a highly decentralized system, but then with some variation in the implementation. Why is that important? Not only because I've always been interested in this division of governmental responsibilities across different layers of government, but I'm particularly interested in how there might be opportunities, perhaps not at the national level, but at the provincial and city level, where there may be opportunities to actually change the rules or change the implementation practice to the extent that we could address some of the inequality that Professor Jia mentioned. So, for example, we know that there is tremendous urban-rural inequality. So maybe at the provincial, at the city level, that's where we could start experimenting some of the designs, variation, to see how the Gaokao moderately redesigned, but within a centralized system, to address the particular concerns and challenges of rural-urban disparity and wealth disparity in those provinces. And then we can then roll up the experimentation and innovation to the national level once we get the data and the analysis. So those are a couple of quick comments on the paper. Thank you. Thanks for a wonderful book. Thank you.
I mean, these are tough questions, right? I mean, it may be your next American Economic Review paper idea.
I just want to say these are all good comments. It's also maybe give the young students a lot of things to study. I just briefly make some comments along these lines. So the relationship between hukou and Gaokao has at least two important layers. On the one hand, your hukou, it's also not only rural, urban, it's also where you are. I'm from Shandong, right? So where you, in principle, you have to take the exam in your local hukou. It's true, because it's such a high-stake exam, there's always some people want to game the system. But that's, I will not talk about that. But let's say for majority of people, we have to take the exam in our hukou. And that's, again, by design. So it's not very equal, right? I'm from Shandong. For Shandong exam takers in recent years, 3% of this exam high school graduates would go to the top 100 college. And for Beijing and Shanghai, this would be 16%. So it's 5 times higher. So there's a lot of research needs to be done. What does this imply? Is this a good system if you care about the average or the total human capital, right? Obviously, people from Shandong and Henan, there are a lot of talented people who couldn't get the equal chance. So that's one dimension. And Kim mentioned another interesting dimension is the opposite way. It's actually college entrance. College in China also played a very important mobility, not only like income mobility, but also geographically mobility, right? I wrote in the book, I grew up in a very, very small village, right? And I moved to Beijing by taking the exam. That said, I want to emphasize, not everyone has equal chance. Kay mentioned everyone has equal chance. Not everyone has equal chance. But I took the exam, I moved to Beijing. I have to say, as I said in the book, the gap I feel from my village to Beijing is much bigger than the gap between Beijing and later I went to Sweden or I teach in London or California. Just for those study China, you can maybe understand. It's just because China is huge geographically, and the disparity is huge. And indeed, this how education affects the geo-mobility of students and what this means, right? It's for development. And this also has a lot of other interesting issues to be discussed, like some regions, like the Northeast, right, the Nodongbe area. Most people educated in good schools, they don't want to go back to develop their hometown. I didn't go back to my village to develop my village, right? Whereas we usually work in bigger cities, and this is the right distribution for the whole society. All these are studied, and this is related to your last point because China is huge. Even though it's a centralized system, the implementation is often decentralized. This is at a broad level is true. So this is sometimes called politically centralized and economically decentralized. Even if you look at the schools, especially at the local level, it's true that financially the tax come from the local government, right? However, the whole contents, the quota, how many teachers can be employed, how many students, these things are, it's like this personal side is centralized, and that is enough, even though financial side or in policy implementation side is often decentralized. And you mentioned that, students compete within their province. And that's, if you are the ruler, it's again very good design for governance, right? Because I'm from Shandong, I won't complain that it's so unfair why Beijing people have higher quota. Usually you don't do this way because you think you are competing with your province. So from political economic perspective, it's a pretty good design for the ruler, but not for people from Shandong. So there's this trade-off, right? Look at our aim of the book is that you read it on the airplane, hopefully. You'll see, if you think it as a ruler, you have a different will. You maybe like this system a lot. Wow, I wish I could rule China. Anyway, but on the other hand, if you have families, you want to think, are there better system? Can there be improvement? Can there be reform? Right? If you're a researcher, then there'll be many, many things to be studied.
So I actually have two questions, but let me ask one first.
Yes.
We're both economists, and we usually study rational behavior. But I think in China there have been something quite irrational, and that is, the chance to be successful is so small, but people are putting so much effort to win the prize. So I mean, you did show the graph saying, well, if you get into the top college, then your lifetime income is going to be much higher. But increasingly, it has become so difficult. And if you want to generalize it a little bit, and you realize even in the private sector, people are talking about involution, right? 内卷. Companies are also doing the same, right? What is the chance that you will be the monopoly in the end? You will be the champion in your sector, and you overcompete. Everyone is, suffering and basically making a loss. So is it something deep in the Chinese culture and history that allow people to be overly competitive, even though probabilistically it is not rational? Or that it is the parents, the grandparents that are putting a lot of pressure, and they become so obedient to respect their older people?
I see. I think it's useful to think a bit different, as in our models, individual behavior versus social outcome. Socially, it's very clear it's inefficient, right? It's a lot of effort were lost or were wasted in this ranking, getting better ranked, right? However, individually, right, it's actually rational, right? It's not that, because this is a prospect of getting to go to the elite college. And it's natural because nowadays, college, it's like, I told you many things didn't change in China, but a lot of things changed very fast, right? When the exam system, the Gaokao system was restored in 1977, what's the share of exam takers would go to a college? The number is 4.8 or 4.7%. Today, how many of the exam takers would go to college? This is the exam. Anyway, 80%. Okay, 80. So when so many students can go to college, naturally college degree, college degree itself is not so valuable. Then you want to go to elite college, right? And to do that is very hard. It's always hard. But you still want your children to. It's difficult to think they are irrational. It's possible that they didn't get the whole calculation correct, right? But it's not irrational, right? So this system, you wish, if you want to change the system, you wish that could there be some reform to make people still study hard, but not too much or work hard in terms of after school in the job market, but not too focus on this ranking, a bit more in terms of increasing the size of the pie, increase the societal value. I think, if you ask me, I think one direction is to make the system less hierarchical. Now it's because it's so hierarchical, because people feel there's, it's first I told you there's top 100 college, that's 211. As you know, within that there's 985, right? This 39 is the college that ranked this is for those who don't know a lot about China, it's called 985 because 985 because in May 1998, Jiang Zemin said, oh, these are the 39 the best colleges in China. And within this 39, right, there's this C9, right? That's like, and within this C9, there's Beida and Tsinghua, right? So it's like it's just, so one way is to mitigate this issue is make the society less hierarchical. And that's a general phenomenon, this general message for even beyond education, right? When you have such a hierarchy, naturally people want to put their effort to climb the ladder.
Right, so I didn't give you time to talk about geopolitics, but I think there's a geopolitical angle behind your answer, right? I guess one of the reasons for why the Chinese government wanted to create all these hierarchies is because they want to make the best universities in the world, right? Yeah. They want Tsinghua to be better than MIT, they want Beida to be better than Harvard.
Yeah.
So I guess this kind of US-China competition will make things even worse for the young kids in China?
So I have, if anyone work for the ministry education in the future, here are some suggestions, some thinking. So first, I think, yeah, understand this. You want to have a few colleges as the world leader, right? But you don't necessarily need to make the whole college system so hierarchical, right? It could be the C9. Some of you are lucky to study there, but the C9 could be, the very, very elite, focus a lot on science technology, but the rest do not necessarily need to be such a clear hierarchy, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is, actually, I see that the US-China tensions should make reforming Chinese system more urgent, right? As you all know, China actually learned a lot from the US or generally abroad in terms of technology and science frontier. And this channel of learning is becoming narrower and narrower, right? So in recent years, it's not in this book, my agenda is to look at what happens to science, technology, collaboration, students between US and China under these tensions, right? And it's very depressing, I have to say. So in a recent study, we even conduct a randomized experiment asking US policymakers and US-based scientists, just give them an experiment. Like some people would randomly get a question like, oh, this is a collaboration between a Chinese scientist and a US scientist on, say, AI. And another scientist randomly get like, oh, this is between German scientist and a US scientist on AI. It's very random, purely random. And the depressing finding I have to share with you is that, yes, policymakers in the US are much less likely to support US-China collaboration than the German-US case. That's maybe not surprising. But even scientists, these are scientists, they also are much more less likely to support the collaboration with China. So this means what China can learn from US at least is becoming limited. And I don't see this. We have also interviewed scientists for quite a few years. Quite a few scientists we interviewed have returned to China. And so given this sense, it said, if you have to rely on your own education system, right, to educate your own talent in some sense, and then how to make the system function better and waste less money and less effort, right, I think is essential. So even from that perspective, there should be incentives to change. Yeah.
Yeah, so another set of questions I have is related to the transmission of values and norms because of the Gaokao and test-based accountability system. So the parents internalize those norms and then pass it on to their children, and then the children may be down to their children further. So the question is, it's all framed in terms of the Gaokao logic. And I was wondering for young people who might depart from that logic, say they still kind of governed by this Gaokao is kind of very difficult to avoid not participating if they want to go to college, but at the same time, their aspirations may lie in becoming, I don't know, a performing artist or a cartoonist or a comedian or some other non-mainstream or non-conventional boxes of careers. So once they depart from that logic, how does the system make sure that they will continue to get the kind of the support for their development along the way? Even after the examination, they may not make it to the top 10 or top 20 universities, but then their aspirations might go on. But so the question is whether we have any data and whether we should be thinking about some data collection strategy to understand 5 years from college or 10 years from Gaokao, what happened to the young people who have a different way of thinking about this logic? And then have they given up on that aspiration, or have they, that's another way of thinking about rationality, right? Rational, behavior. That is, or have they kind of find a way to kind of, support their alternative aspiration? And how might the system be kind of redesigned in such a way to make this more holistic? And even though right now it's all geared toward a more unidimensional, approach.
Yeah. Okay, so first, just share, share some anecdote. I spend, of course, every summer spend the time in Beijing or Shanghai or my village. But that's what I want to say, that you observe that a lot of my classmates become professors. I also interact a lot with professors, which is a boring profession. But what surprised me is that they tutor their children so much, right? It's just, it's in principle, we know this, we see this system. We are able to see what the problem of the system. Yet everyone I met are sending their children in Shanghai to the, if you are in Beijing, you send them to study Olympic math, right? It's all true. Whereas in Shanghai, you send them to English classes, etc. But there's some regional difference. That said, we just talk always, as I said, on the table, on the meal time conversation is always about children's education. So we try to, why do professors still educate their children so much, right? Why do we tutor them so much? And then someone come up with the interesting answer, said, oh, we professors have seen the best students, so our children can never be good enough. Anyway, that's a joke. What I want to say that then the answer is, maybe who would be more relaxed in educating children? There may be doctors. Then I talk with some doctors, because doctors said the worst case in human life, they should be more relaxed. But all the doctors I know are very tutor their children so much. That's the joke aside. I just think it's true. It's on the one hand, given there's always some people who could escape from the norms and become artists, right? But it's not. But the system itself, indeed, is too hierarchical, too uniform in measuring success. I think there should be, if there's, we hope this society could be a bit more diversified in measuring success. One thing, for instance, in a more specific change, is related to, I hinted this in the talk, it's just your first choice, your major, for instance, stick to too much, too longer with you, right? It's just the shadow is so long, it looms so large in our life. Perhaps that is not too difficult to change. There's some marginal reforms nowadays already, but to make it easier for children to, not for young people, even after they went to college, to figure out what they like, to make it easier to change major or change field, and that's already could be useful, right? Yeah. As I said, Homi and I are just very lucky that we like economics. But there's so many econ PhD who become PhD just because they just happened to choose economics in the summer of after the exam. Yeah.
All right, okay, let me rescue you out from the boring discussions with two professors. I feel that I put you into another oral exam here. So let me open up the Q&A to the floor.
Should I introduce myself? I'm Jean-Pierre Cabessin, originally from France, emeritus professor at HKBU. I have two questions. One about the history of the Gaokao. You compare with the keju, but there are two very different animals. The keju is to recruit civil servants. The Gaokao, involves many more people. And I would like to know more about the origin of the Gaokao in the Republican era after the abolition of the keju. It seems to me that it comes from Japan. As you know, Japan created universities earlier than China. Todai, and the same type of, to enter Todai or Keio is as hard as to enter Beta or Futan. And actually the Japanese invented the system earlier, my sense is. So to what extent the Gaokao comes from, first of all, Republican era, as you know, in Taiwan, they have the Liankao, which is just the same. They recruit people, they select students very early on. So that's my first question. And the second one is, more and more people, they're calling among my students from China, they get away from, they don't take the Gaokao anymore. If they come from middle class backgrounds, their parents would send them to the US or to a college in California, in Australia or in Canada, not to take, not to have to take that exam, which is a hustle, and you succeed in life much better, as well as in many areas with a diploma from the US and elsewhere. So these are my two questions. Thank you.
Do you want to answer two questions first?
Yeah, these are all good questions. First, I just want to say that even though you could argue that the form of the model, the contents, or the text, the subjects, kind of also learned from Japan, because the success of Meiji Restoration has a very, very profound effect of China at that time. That said, as an institutional design, so inherited more from the historical exam system. In Japan, there's no such, when you see Republic China, there's an institution called 考试院, the exam branch, right? Still in Taiwan nowadays. It's functioned as a branch in the instead of the three branches. Taiwan and the Republic of China has 5 branches, and one of them the exam, right? That's exactly to take this as a political institution, even though the content could be borrowed in terms of to modernize that, the contents could be borrowed from Japan. And about study abroad itself, it's very, very interesting, and there could be a lot of things to be studied by people of different fields, how this affects China, how this affects different countries. That said, these things change pretty fast. And nowadays, so for instance, just again, I was teaching in the UK during the pandemic. I was asking a student, I was teaching at the LSE, so he had an LSE degree, right? I asked him, if you had like Peking University degree or UCSD degree, which do you prefer, an LSE degree? And the answer is Peking University. It's because this things change very fast. The value, as you know, that the labor market, the evaluation of foreign degrees has decreased a lot, except for the very elite class, maybe Oxford and Cambridge are okay, and the top schools in the US, okay, even UCSD. He ranked UCSD at the last one. I was heartbroken. But that's like but for several decades, that was what you are describing. I think these things would be changed very fast, partly because of the improvement of Chinese own education, partly because of geopolitics. I think it's very nice to follow this trend and the changes. It's true that said, actually many people study abroad to avoid the Gaokao. And that's also related to why the labor market responded to this, because they now know that, oh, you come from UCSD, so what? You are not good at the Gaokao. I would prefer to hire a PE. That's the logic. Yeah. Okay.
Now there are a lot of parents sending their kids to Hong Kong to go through DSE so that they can go to Hong Kong U.
Yes.
Thank you, Professor Jia, for excellent book, and Professor Tang and Professor Wong's insightful comments. I come from mainland China. I took the Gaokao years before the Ministry of Education changed the date from July to June.
July.
More than 20 years ago, right? I still have nightmare about this Gaokao for years. My question is that given the less important role of the Gaokao for recent days, but we still see that the graduate school entry exam, 考研, and as well as the civil servant exam, 考公, or even the government officials' promotion tournaments, they're still on the way. So that's just like Professor Tan has mentioned. What do you think? Have you seen an end of this over-competition, especially for in the age of escalations of geopolitical tension? Yeah.
I think you mentioned, if I understand, feel free to follow up if I wasn't clear. So first, as I said, nowadays, one phenomenon is that it's so easy, unfortunately, to go to college, right, compared to when you took the exam. Because China's college entrance exam, college admission expanded since 1998, right? Within 10 years, there's like 8-fold or more college graduates. And nowadays, just for your information, in the whole world, let's see, among every 5 college graduates, 1 is Chinese. So there's so many college graduates, so that's naturally lead to the inflation in degree, right? Some people need to go to a master degree and even doctoral degree. It's again, maybe it's worthwhile thinking that it's really about human capital, or it's actually mainly about signaling, right? I think these are all very interesting. Another thing is that with economic slowing down, I think these things become more and more serious because with economic slowing down, right? Because the pie is fixed or even smaller, then you want to have more credentials, right, to stand out in this competition. And that the civil service exam passion, this enthusiasm is also reflected that in the economic slowing down of society, private jobs are less valuable, and having very stable public jobs with certain benefits become very, very valuable. So there'll be more and more people participating in that exam. And that's related to what I told you now, the Chinese, both US and Chinese, the college system become very homogeneous but hierarchical, right? There used to be a lot of shifan, the normal schools, they would become teachers. Nowadays, as you may know, they become base for taking the master or graduate exam because everyone is trying to move again along this hierarchy, right? So, yeah.
On this, I want to follow up. Sorry, I'm going to give everyone a chance to ask a question because I couldn't hold this question for too long. And that is, there's this phenomenon which is called 躺平, right? Lying flat.
Yeah.
So I think as an economist, lying flat is a rational response to this overly competitive system.
Yeah.
So the two questions I want to ask is like, do you think the Chinese government needs to address the 躺平 phenomenon, or it's fine, right? These are all losers. Right? We only want like 10% of the people to make the country glorified and successful.
I found it interesting. On the one hand, people talk a lot about 躺平, a lot, right? As we all know. But I haven't seen many people 躺平. Could be all the entrepreneurs I met, they also talk about 躺平, but they all like invest. But I found it's like more like reflect this psychological. The response than maybe they're group of people. I basically showed them kind of out of touch in some part that I think the government wants you to address this problem. The government will try to address a lot of the problems we are talking about, including the education system. What did they do? Like they said, we should ban the tutoring, right? Or we should. Too much tutoring, right? Too competitive. Let's ban it. Or we should force the schools to have 双减, the decrease the burden of the for homework, etc. But all these are like they identified the right problem but found the wrong solution. I would say, right? Because it didn't solve the fundamental issue, right? Is that these people have to, given this incentive structure, everyone wants to invest, right? You just suppress their investment, it wouldn't work, as you can imagine. Similarly, I think if you want to address the 躺平, it's more to address the societal problem. This is related also the inequality. How would you, again, if you really just have this, you take meritocracy as a religion, say, take an exam as a religion. If you believe it so much that you would lack sympathy to these people, then the whole society, should China have a bit more better welfare system given the development stage? If you ask me, I think it should, but not everyone would agree. I think if there's voting, given that everyone, so far, if you look at survey, people are still believe that people succeed because they work hard. People fail because they are lazy or not good. If you have such a belief, then you wouldn't be able to develop a system that makes the society more equal and help what you call losers. You call them losers. I
didn't call them losers. I said, like, it's a hypothetical question.
Yeah, I was kidding. Sorry, sometimes I joke too much.
Hi, thank you so much for your sharing. I wanted to ask you to kind of double click a little more on, you mentioned AI. So obviously today AI can analyze, AI can code, AI can remember everything. So the value of the human is different in education and in work. How should China, if you were in charge, how should China adapt to this?
First, when you talk about education, you have to think about AI. That said, there's no real answer, right? I think if people claim I know the answer of the future of AI, usually they are lying. I think there's a lot of interest in better understanding this. I think coming back to what I know be a bit better in terms of education system. I see this as the strength of the Chinese system. In the sense, when there's new technology, also similar for Hong Kong, right? When there's new technology, I feel the Chinese system and the Hong Kong system is more willing, is more open to this new system, more willing to experiment and adopt such a technology. It's actually more difficult for a system like the US to respond more quickly. So in that sense, I feel it's a bit hopeful on this layer. That said, how AI would affect us, I would, again, here I would say this following. For good or bad, it would affect education not as much as people, not as quickly as people said. Because education still fundamentally is stratification, kind of this function. So it will be kind of be protected from this technological shock for a while. That would, if you ask me to guess.
I think in recent years, I've heard some saying that in some Western countries, people are beginning to differentiate between different types of majors or degrees. And there's an argument that some degrees are not really worth your investment, that you actually didn't earn that much and you pay a lot of tuition fee and so on. And of course, as you just said, the STEM majors are already kind of in the majority in China. But do you see that kind of, saying or differentiation in China as well, that people are increasingly looking down on maybe social science, humanities, and so on?
Yes, there's a lot of change. And a major change is actually exactly in my field of economics. So when Hongbi and I decided to study economics, the reason we wrote about ourselves in the book, not because we love ourselves so much, mainly because we are kind of examples that are influenced by the whole system, the larger system. In reflection, at that time, when we were young, we wouldn't realize. But at that time, economics is a very hot major. For me, in 1990, I was in 2000, earlier 2000. It's the best major. The whole country have higher quotas and promoting economics. So we kind of get influenced, even though we didn't know. Now, people are less willing to study economics. So for instance, one striking thing is that there are few colleges that focus on economics and business major. These are called 财经大学. The universities of finance, economics and finance. During the 1990s and 2000s, several of these colleges came from being very, very low ranked to the top 20 or even top 15 universities. And you will see in recent years, their rank now come to like, nowhere, sorry. But even just say Tsinghua, Jingguan, just to give you an example, the school of finance, economics and finance and management. They used to recruit the 状元, right? The number one from each province. Now, they can barely recruit top 10 students from each province. Because people are less likely to study economics. They want to study more STEM. And they also see this is related to generally the good jobs that used to be associated with economics, like banking or investment bank. Those jobs first is to become fewer, second their pay is not higher. It's also regulated by the government. So now economics decline a lot. And economics is already lucky, right? Of course, humanity is decline everywhere. And that's not a China phenomenon, it's a global phenomenon, right? It's also happening in the US. I just share with you some interesting experience. Last week, I was giving a talk at Yale. This is obviously at elite university. And then a student came to me. We were talking. He said, I enrolled at a class. And in this class, every required reading comes from our rare book library, right? They have a library called Binac Library, which has all these rare books. And the professor came to teach us from Tokyo University every year. Fly just to teach us. At first, it just told me what an elite university is. They asked her, how many students are enrolled in this class? The answer is 4. So yes, even there, students are more likely to study AI, so that's the global trend. then how would we deal with this? Is social science and humanity still important for innovation? We don't have an answer. I can't, don't have very empirical evidence, but I think it's worthwhile thinking together for the whole society's future.
Can I just quickly add to this question and response? And that is, I think this debate is a big one at a global level. Around the world, I think we are talking about what is the purpose of a university? What are the aims of having a university as an institution? And so many years ago, I remember that at MIT, which is well renowned for science and technology and discovery, scientific discovery, and the president and the board there insisted to invest in humanities and social sciences and English literature and English major. And why is that? Because from their perspective, good scientists can learn more from their peers if they also come to university where they could major in English and history and philosophy and social sciences. And so I think financially speaking, it's a real struggle right now, right? Because university has limited resources. But this could be a cyclical kind of a pendulum swing, right? That is, in the future, in the next few years, things might change from the federal government and down. And so the question is that in the short run, there is tremendous financial stress on universities, and how do we navigate in the short run to make sure that we don't give up on the broader aims of education and maintain such a system in a way that would allow us to kind of reinvest, right, reinforce after this short cycle of stress is over. So I think this is a much bigger conversation.
All right, there is a question down there.
Thank you all for the insights. I took Gaokao 10 years ago, or like 15 years ago actually, and I am from Shanghai, so I guess I'm one of the beneficiaries of the quota system. So I have two questions. The first one is, if I listen to you correctly, given the significant role of the quota system in plays in the political stability, is it okay to imply that this system, the quota system, is kind of like just immutable, or it cannot be changed? And then the second one is, given your, just from your own understanding and your critical analysis of the Gaokao system, do you think under what circumstances or specific scenarios we could see a significant change in the system? Maybe in the long future, but like under what kind of conditions you can see these changes? Thank you.
First, the quota system, there are always people wants to change, right? That's, I think, I believe if it's more equal, it certainly has its beneficial side. But there's such a strong interest group, and if you are the ruler, maybe you don't have an incentive to change. In fact, this is related to, so why you may realize that over time there will be more. When I took the exam more than 20 years ago, not many provinces have their independent exam text, right? Exam questions. Over time, you see more and more questions, more and more provinces had started having their own exam questions. And there's a story behind these changes, because I think around 2003. These are female students from Shandong sued the Ministry of Education for this problem. But many of you may not know, because this was censored immediately. And as a response to see how should we make this look like a bit less comparable, exactly, like they don't want to make it comparable across province. So let's allow more provinces to administrate their own exam papers. So what this just said is a political, fundamentally a political question, right? Economically, it may make sense to change, to make it more fair, but politically, how to change it, unless there's a big, protest or something, I guess it's difficult, right? This always happened, even though maybe if you grew up in China, this news were not very circulated a lot. There's also once some discussion about having more quota from Beijing to to Jiangsu, right? Some of you may know. And that's immediately caused the protest in Beijing, right? So, yeah, so it's so high stake, so it's not easy to change. So to change it, this is related to your second question. There are many spaces to be changed. I think that could improve, even some small margin could improve the system a lot. But you need political vision and political leadership. In some sense, it's easy to change in China because it's a centralized system, right? It's more difficult to change the US system because it's a lot of these are private institutions, etc. So in some sense, if the central government wants to change, they have the capacity. But because everyone has invested so much, right? You know, I imagine your relative in Shanghai would protest if there is some discussion about reducing your quota to give it to us. So fundamentally it's a political economy question rather than an education question.
Let us take one last question. So maybe.
I want to mention I'll stay here until December to answer your questions. So
stay in this room until December.
Feel free to email me if we don't have a chance to.
There's a female student who, in the front who has raised her hand earlier. Sorry for the people who have been waiting.
Thanks. I'm a year 1 student in Bachelor of Social Science. Like, this is my first year and first time in HKU. Like, in the first month, I experienced a lot of different people, and the most frequently question they ask me is, do you want to change your major in the year 2? Yeah. Like, even some people, I only knew them for 1 day or 2 days. I think this is somehow, and someone even makes a statement, you want to change your major, not a question. Yeah. So it really makes me feel like, not really feel well. And most of them are coming from mainland, even though some are international students who never experienced Gaokao. But like, do you think Gaokao system somehow influence our mind? Like, we are less tolerant to some seems less important majors, or some like we are focused too much on the results, on some realistic results.
I see. First, I thought you were talking about something very good in the sense. I feel the Hong Kong education system. I'm sure if you know a system, you will have a lot of complaints. I'm sure those who grew up in Hong Kong has a lot of complaints about the Hong Kong education system. That said, as an outsider observing Hong Kong universities and the education system, I found it's a good example for Chinese mainland to learn. So what you mentioned, I would say this flexibility of changing majors. Also, you know, among the top 8 universities, the hierarchy is not. It's still a hierarchy. I know that the medical school at HKU is the jewelry of the hierarchy. But that said, I think it's much more mixed, right, than the Chinese hierarchy system. So that makes it a bit less. Even though it's also stressful studying in Hong Kong schools, I know, but it's less anxious than the Chinese hierarchical system. That I said, I think it's, for those study education in some of you, then I think comparing these two systems could be a very, very interesting research for a project. And but in the end, what you said is about this value. Is it true that I wouldn't blame culture. I just think it's mainly the institution and the incentive structure. People are so anxious, right, in this system, thinking about how can I get a good job? What kind of major would make me get a good job? And the reason that people are so anxious, because if you don't get a good job, you feel you are miserable. You would be miserable, probably because the whole system doesn't have a buffer zone for those who just pursuing what they like, right? So this, we come to this fundamental change. How would we think the future of Chinese society? Should we think it as a tournament, and we like the exam so much that we'll treat our society as exam? If you fail the exam, you are a loser, as some would say. Or should we should hope our society have some reforms? Make it less tournament-like, a bit more accommodating, so that people can find out what they are good at and what they like. If you ask me, I think it's time to, because the exam system is already works so well in strengths, but it has so many weaknesses. I think it's time to think about, to shift the focus a little bit from the tournament. Because the tournament has a stress, it will make you work. incentivize people to work hard. I think Chinese people already work a lot hard. You don't have lunch, you came here to listen to my talk. You are already working very hard. I think it's more a bit more relaxed and a bit more diversified would be better for individuals and the society.
Great. Thank you so much, Rachel. Sorry, it's already 2 p.m. And this topic can go on forever, and it also shows how important this topic to everyone who came to your talk. And I believe your research will continue in this direction. And as Professor Jia has said, she will be here at Hong Kong until early December.
Yes.
And she will be happy to talk to you about anything related to Gaokao or Chinese economy or whatever related to China. Thank you so much, Professor Jia, and thank you, Professor Wang as well.